I signed the divorce papers right there on the crisp white tablecloth, moving my pen smoothly past the untouched anniversary tiramisu. My husband Dante watched me with a smirk, his eyes gleaming not with regret, but with the thrill of a man who thinks he just pulled off the deal of a century. He thought he was discarding a barren wife to secure his legacy. He had no idea he was handing the keys to his destruction to the very woman who knew where all the bodies were buried. My name is Keisha, and at 34 years old, I am a forensic accountant who specializes in finding what powerful men try to hide. Tonight was supposed to be our 12th anniversary celebration at the Onyx, the most exclusive Black-owned restaurant in Los Angeles. I had arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a silk emerald dress that Dante used to say made me look like royalty. I had ordered his favorite bottle of vintage Cabernet and waited. And waited. Dante arrived 40 minutes late. He did not kiss me. He did not apologize. He did not even sit down immediately. He stood by the table adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit, a suit I knew I had paid for with my last bonus check, and looked at me with the cold detachment of a stranger. "Happy anniversary," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my stomach. Dante finally sat down, but he waved away the waiter who approached with menus. "We are not eating," he said flatly. He reached into his briefcase, and instead of a jewelry box or a card, he pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the table. It knocked over the small vase of roses, sending water spilling onto the linen. "What is this?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my gut told me I already knew. "It is over, Keisha," Dante said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a cruelty that cut through the ambient jazz music. "I am filing for divorce. I need you to sign these. My lawyer drafted them this morning. It is a generous settlement considering you have contributed nothing to the sterling legacy." I stared at him. Nothing. I had managed his books, built his credit score from the ground up, and invested every cent of my salary into our lifestyle while he played venture capitalist with family money. "You are leaving me," I repeated slowly. "On our anniversary." Dante sighed, looking bored. "Let us be logical, Keisha. Marriage is a contract. And as an investment, you are a liability. 12 years, no children, no heir. You know the terms of the Sterling Legacy Trust. My father was very specific. I knew the terms. The trust fund worth $50 million would only fully vest on Dante's 37th birthday next month if he could prove he had a biological male heir or a stable marriage with the potential for one. Since we had struggled with infertility for a decade, he was running out of time. "I am a man of significant standing," Dante continued, leaning back. "I need a woman who reflects my future, not my stagnant past. You are too old-fashioned, Keisha. Too safe. I need vitality. I need youth. And most importantly, I need a son." The cruelty was breathtaking. He was speaking about me as if I were a used car he was trading in. I looked around the restaurant. I saw the discreet glances from other tables. In our social circle, appearance was everything, and Dante was humiliating me publicly without a second thought. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Dante checked his watch. "Her name is Jasmine. She is 24. She is vibrant. And unlike you, she knows her duty as a woman." Jasmine, his executive assistant. The one I had hired 6 months ago because I thought she needed a break. The one I had mentored. I looked down at the papers. He was offering me nothing. No alimony, no share of the house. Just my personal belongings and a swift exit. "If you do not sign now," Dante threatened, dropping his voice, "I will make this ugly. I will drag you through court until you are bankrupt. I will tell everyone about your medical inability to conceive. Do you really want your failure broadcasted to the entire church?" He knew exactly where to hit. For years, I had protected his ego. I had taken the blame for our infertility issues, silently enduring the pitying looks from his mother and the whispers at social gatherings. I had shielded him from the truth of his own medical history because I loved him. But looking at him now, the love evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. He was not a partner. He was a target, and I was the best auditor in the city. I picked up the pen. Fine, I said. Dante blinked, surprised by my lack of resistance. He had expected tears. He had expected a scene he could use to paint me as the unstable, emotional ex-wife. I signed the document with a flourish, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. I pushed the envelope back to him. Done, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Dante grabbed the papers, checking the signature as if he expected a trick. Good, he said, letting out a breath. You finally did something useful. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a celebration to attend. He did not wait for me to leave. He raised his hand and signaled toward the entrance. The heavy oak doors opened, and Jasmine walked in. She was wearing a tight white dress that left little to the imagination, and she was not alone. She walked with one hand resting possessively on a small but visible baby bump. The air left my lungs. Jasmine strutted to the table, her eyes locking with mine. There was no shame in her gaze, only triumph. She waited until I stood up, and then she slid into my warm chair. "Hello, Keisha," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Thank you for being reasonable. Dante and I were so worried you would make this difficult for the baby." She looked at Dante and he beamed at her, placing a hand over hers on the table. "A male heir," he said loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. The ultrasound confirmed it this morning. A sterling son, finally. I stood there clutching my purse, feeling the eyes of the room on me. The waiter arrived with a bottle of champagne Dante must have pre-ordered. To the future, Dante toasted, clinking his glass against Jasmine's. To freedom. And to family. They drank, ignoring me completely. I was a ghost in my own life. The discard pile. I turned to walk away, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Every step took effort. My mind was racing, connecting dots I should have seen months ago. The late nights. The missing funds in the joint account I had noticed but ignored. The way Jasmine had started dressing like me, but younger. But as I reached the door, I stopped. The years of training as a forensic accountant kicked in. Patterns, anomalies, details that do not add up. I remembered a medical file I had seen years ago, a file Dante thought was lost. A file that detailed a bout of mumps orchitis he had suffered at 20 years old. A file that had a very specific conclusion about his fertility. I turned around. I walked back to the table slowly. Dante saw me coming and rolled his eyes, setting his glass down. "What now, Keisha? Do not beg, it is pathetic." I did not look at him. I looked at Jasmine. I looked at her belly. Then I looked at Dante, who was glowing with the pride of a man who believed he had conquered biology. I leaned down, my face inches from his ear. The scent of his expensive cologne, the one I bought him, mixed with the smell of truffle oil from their appetizers. "I just wanted to offer a piece of advice." I whispered, my voice low and smooth like velvet. Dante recoiled slightly, but he was listening. "Make sure you get a receipt for that baby," I said. "What are you talking about?" Dante snapped. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. "Because considering your medical history from college, Dante, that baby is a miracle. Are you absolutely sure it is yours?" I pulled back and watched the color drain from his face. The smirk vanished. His eyes darted to Jasmine, who suddenly looked very interested in her menu. "Happy anniversary, Dante." I turned and walked out of the onyx into the cool night air. I did not cry. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. "It is Keisha," I said when the line connected. "I need a full audit on Dante Sterling, and I need a rush order on a paternity test kit. I have a feeling the Sterling Legacy Trust is about to get very complicated." The war had just begun, and Dante had just fired the first shot at the only person who knew he was shooting blanks. The rain started before I even reached the hills of View Park, turning the Los Angeles streets into slick rivers of reflected neon light. It was fitting, really. My 12-year marriage had just dissolved over a tiramisu, and now the sky was weeping the tears I refused to shed. I drove my Audi up the winding roads toward the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The house I had found. The house I had renovated. The house where I had planned to raise the children Dante claimed I could not give him. As I pulled into the driveway, the headlights cut through the downpour and illuminated a scene that made my breath hitch in my throat. My belongings were not in the house. They were scattered across the wet pavement of the driveway like garbage at a landfill. My designer suits, my collection of vintage silk scarves, the books I had collected since college, all of it soaking in the muddy water. I parked the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I stepped out into the rain, ignoring the cold water that instantly soaked my dress. I walked to the front door, the heavy oak entrance I had picked out myself, and jammed my key into the lock. It did not turn. I tried again, jiggling it, thinking perhaps my hands were just shaking too much. But the mechanism was stiff and unyielding. They had changed the locks. In the 2 hours I had been at dinner getting dumped by my husband, someone had physically erased my access to my own home. The door swung open before I could knock. It was not Dante standing there. It was Mama Joyce. My mother-in-law stood in the warm glow of the foyer, arms crossed over her chest, wearing a smug expression that told me she had been waiting for this moment for a decade. Behind her, peering over her shoulder with a glass of white wine in hand, was Becky, my sister-in-law, Dante's brother Terrence's wife. Her blonde hair was perfectly blow-dried, and she offered me a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "You can stop scratching at the door like a stray cat," Keisha Mama Joyce said, her voice booming over the sound of the rain. "You do not live here anymore." I stood on the porch, water dripping from my hair into my eyes. "This is my house, Joyce," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "My name is on the mortgage. I paid the down payment. Move out of my way." Mama Joyce let out a harsh laugh. "Your name was on the mortgage, honey, but Dante fixed that last month. He told me you signed a quitclaim deed. Something about refinancing for the business. You really should read what you signed, Keisha. For a smart girl, you are incredibly stupid when it comes to love." My stomach dropped. I remembered the papers. Dante had slid them into a stack of tax documents 3 weeks ago. "Just a formality, babe," he had said, kissing my neck. "Just to move some assets around for the trust fund requirements." I had trusted him. I had signed my own eviction notice. "Now get your trash off my driveway," Mama Joyce continued, gesturing to the lawn. "Dante is bringing Jasmine home tonight. She is carrying the sterling air. She needs peace and quiet, not the negative energy of a barren ex-wife." Becky stepped forward, then sipping her wine. "We tried to pack your things nicely, Keisha," she said, her voice dripping with that faux concern that always made my skin crawl. "But we were in such a rush to get the nursery ready. You understand, right? We had to clear out of that office you were hoarding. It has the best light for the baby. My office, my sanctuary." I looked past them into the hallway. I saw boxes. I saw the remnants of my life stacked up to be discarded. And then I saw what Becky was holding in her other hand. It was a wooden crate, old, worn, and precious. My heart stopped. That crate held the only thing I had left of my father, his vintage jazz vinyl collection, original pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk. Records he had played for me on Sunday mornings when I was a little girl learning to count by the rhythm of the bass. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not in money, but in soul. "Put that down," I said, my voice shaking for the first time. "Becky, give me the crate." Becky looked at the crate, as if she had just realized she was holding it. "Oh, this old dusty thing," she said, tilting her head. "It smells like mildew, Keisha. We could not have this around a newborn. The mold spores alone are a health hazard." "It is not mildew, it is history," I shouted, stepping forward. "Give it to me." Becky smirked. She walked past Mama Joyce onto the porch. She held the crate out over the railing directly above the concrete steps where the rainwater was pooling. "You know, Terrence always says you hold on to the past too much," she said lightly. "Maybe it is time to let go. You do not fit in this family, Keisha. You never did. Your music is just like you. Outdated. A little too loud. And not quite right for us." She opened her hands. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. But I was too late. The crate hit the concrete with a sickening crunch. I heard the snap of vinyl, the shattering of history. The record spilled out, sliding into the muddy puddles. I watched as a first pressing of Kind of Blue cracked down the middle, the label soaking up the dirty water. Oops, Becky said, covering her mouth with a feigned gasp. My hands are just so slippery from the wine. So sorry, Keisha, but really it is for the best. You need a fresh start, without all this baggage. I fell to my knees on the wet concrete. I reached for the broken pieces of my father's legacy. The rain was washing away the album art, turning the cardboard into pulp. I gathered the shards against my chest, the sharp edges of the vinyl scratching my skin. I looked up at them. Mama Joyce was laughing softly, a low rumble of satisfaction. Becky was looking down at me with pity masked as superiority. They looked like giants, standing in the warmth of the house I had built, looking down at the peasant in the mud. They expected me to scream. They expected me to attack them, to give them a reason to call the police and have me dragged away. They wanted the angry black woman narrative to justify everything they had done. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharpening my mind. I stood up slowly, clutching the ruined records to my chest. I did not wipe the rain from my face. I did not fix my dress. I just looked at them. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. My fingers were numb, but I managed to request a ride. You think you have won? I said, my voice deadly calm, cutting through the sound of the storm. You think because you changed the locks and broke my records that you have broken me. Mama Joyce scoffed. You are broken, Keisha. You have no husband, no house, no children. You are nothing. Go find a hotel room and cry it out. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking on the wet pavement. I stopped at the bottom and turned back to look at the house. The house where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners. The house where I had nursed Dante through the flu. The house where I had signed away my youth. I looked directly at Mama Joyce. Enjoy the house, Joyce, I said. Get comfortable, decorate the nursery, because I am going to take it all back. I shifted my gaze to Becky. And you, Becky, you think you are safe because you are the sister-in-law who produced the nieces and nephews. You think your whiteness shields you from the sterling cruelty, but you just started a war you do not have the budget for. A pair of headlights swept across the lawn. My ride was here. I opened the car door and placed the wet, broken records gently on the seat. Before I got in, I turned one last time. Keep the locks, I called out. You are going to need them to keep the police out when I am done with you. I slammed the car door, shutting out their confused expressions. As the car pulled away, I did not look back at the mansion on the hill. I looked down at the broken record in my lap. I was homeless. I was divorced. I was alone. But as I traced the crack in the vinyl, I felt a cold, hard resolve settling in my gut. They had taken my past. They had tried to destroy my future. But they had forgotten who I was in the present. I was a forensic accountant. I knew how to follow the money, and I knew exactly where the Sterling family buried their skeletons. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with concern. Where to, miss? He asked. Take me to the extended stay on La Brea, I said. And then I need to find a 24-hour electronics store. Why? He asked gently. Because, I said, staring out at the rain-blurred city lights, I have a lot of work to do. And I am going to need a very good voice recorder. The eviction was the beginning, but the audit was coming. And unlike my marriage, the numbers would not lie. The extended stay motel on La Brea smelled of lemon cleaner and stale cigarette smoke, a sharp contrast to the lavender diffusers and fresh linens of the home I had just been evicted from. I sat at the small wobbly desk, pushing aside the complimentary coffee maker to make room for my laptop. Outside the window, sirens wailed, and the neon sign of a 24-hour liquor store buzzed with a rhythmic electrical hum. It was 3 a.m. Most women in my position would be sleeping or crying or calling their mothers. I was doing none of those things. I was working. I opened my laptop and the screen cast a harsh blue glow over my face. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I only engaged in before a difficult audit. For 12 years I had been Dante Sterling's wife, his partner, and his support system. But tonight, I was none of those things. Tonight, I was the senior forensic auditor who had brought down 3 Ponzi schemes and a corrupt city councilman. Dante thought he had stripped me of my power by taking my house and my husband's status. He forgot that I was the one who set up his passwords. I navigated to the login page for the Sterling Venture Capital Secure server. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Dante was arrogant. He was the kind of man who believed he was too smart to be hacked and too important to follow basic security protocols. He had likely changed his social media passwords to lock me out of his public image, but the financial backend, the boring stuff, the numbers he hated looking at, he would have left that alone. I typed in the admin username. Then I typed in the password. It was the date of our wedding, followed by the word forever. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I let out a short, humorless laugh. He was so lazy. He had discarded the marriage but kept the password because remembering a new string of numbers was too much effort for a man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life. I was in. I started with the joint accounts, the ones he thought I was too emotional to check. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 6 months. The numbers scrolled past, reflecting the life we had built. Mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries. And then I saw it. A transfer. It was not small. It was a hemorrhage. $500,000 wired out of our joint retirement fund. The nest egg I had contributed to with every bonus check, every overtime hour, every tax season hustle. It was gone. Transferred to an LLC I did not recognize called New Horizon Holdings. I opened a second window and ran a search on the LLC. It was registered in Nevada 3 months ago. The signatory was obscured, but the associated bank account led to a debit card purchase history that told a story more vivid than any confession. Exotic Motors Los Angeles, $280,000. Tiffany & Co. Beverly Hills, $85,000. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard knot in my chest. He had bought a supercar. Probably that matte black Lamborghini he had been drooling over on Instagram. And the ring. The ring Jasmine was probably wearing right now, while she slept in my bed. He had paid for his mistress's engagement ring with his wife's retirement money. But why steal from the retirement fund? Dante had access to the family operating accounts. He had a trust allowance. Why risk a federal crime by draining a joint 401k without spousal consent? Unless he had no other choice. I dug deeper. I switched from the joint accounts to his personal credit lines. This was where the forensic part kicked in. I looked for patterns. I looked for the holes where the money should be. The Sterling family name was synonymous with wealth, but the numbers on my screen were telling a different story. Dante was not rich. He was drowning. I found transfers to offshore accounts in Malta and Curacao, online casinos, high-stakes poker sites. The amounts were staggering. 50,000 lost on a Tuesday, 100,000 lost on a Friday. He was bleeding cash. Then I checked his investment portfolio, or what was left of it. He had leveraged everything on a series of high-risk crypto coins that had crashed 6 months ago. The timeline matched perfectly with when he started bringing Jasmine to business dinners. He was panicking. He was broke. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I was Peter. But debt alone did not explain the urgency of the divorce. He could have stayed married and tried to hide it. Why the rush? Why the public humiliation? I pulled up the digital copy of the Sterling Legacy Trust documents. I had scanned them years ago when I was organizing his files. I scrolled to the disbursement clauses. There it was. Clause 4, Section B. The primary beneficiary, Dante Marcus Sterling, shall receive the corpus of the trust, totaling $50 million upon his 37th birthday, provided he has established a line of succession. This is defined as a biological male heir born in wedlock, or a stable marriage of no less than 5 years with proof of viable pregnancy. I checked the date. Dante turned 37 in exactly 30 days. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a satisfying click. He was broke. He owed sharks and bookies money he did not have. He needed that $50 million to save his life and his reputation, but I had not given him a son. And after 12 years, our marriage was a dead end for the trust requirements because he needed the heir to secure the payout immediately. Jasmine was not just a mistress, she was a transaction. She was an incubator for his $50 million check. He needed that baby boy born or at least proven to exist before his birthday deadline. That was why he evicted me. That was why he needed the divorce signed tonight. He needed to marry Jasmine and legitimize that pregnancy before the trustee reviewed his file next month. He was not in love. He was in debt. I sat back in the cheap motel chair, the springs creaking under me. He had destroyed my life not out of passion, but out of accounting. He had calculated that discarding me was cheaper than missing out on his inheritance. I saved every document. I downloaded the bank statements, the gambling logs, the crypto losses, and the fraudulent transfer of my retirement funds. I created a folder named The Sterling Audit and encrypted it with a password he would never guess. Just as I was about to close the laptop, a notification chimed. A new email had arrived in my personal inbox. It was not from a client or a lawyer. The sender name was blank. The subject line was just one word: karma. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. It was 4 in the morning. Who was emailing me now? I clicked open the message. The body of the email was short, but it stopped my heart. Ms. Sterling, I saw what happened at the Onyx tonight. I used to work at the University Health Center in 2008. Your husband was a patient of mine. He treats people like garbage, and he thinks his money can bury the truth. You should request his full medical file from his sophomore year. Look for the treatment records regarding mumps or orchitis. He is lying to everyone, including himself. There was no signature, just an attachment. A grainy, scanned image of an old patient admission form with Dante's name and date of birth. Mumps or orchitis. I froze. I knew what mumps was, but orchitis. I quickly opened a new tab and typed the term into the search bar. Inflammation of the testicles caused by mumps infection. Possible complications. I hit enter. The search results loaded. Top result: infertility, sterility, azoospermia. I read the medical definition. In adult males, mumps or orchitis can lead to testicular atrophy and permanent sterility in significant percentage of cases. I looked back at the anonymous email. University Health Center, 2008. Dante would have been 20 years old. We met when he was 22. He had never mentioned this. He had watched me endure years of invasive fertility treatments. He had watched me take hormone injections that made me sick. He had watched me cry over negative pregnancy tests, month after month. He had let his mother call me barren, and all this time he might have known. I felt a new kind of anger, hotter and sharper than the rage over the money. This was a violation of my body and my soul. He had let me believe I was the broken one. I looked at the date of the email. It had been sent 10 minutes ago. Someone else hated Dante Sterling. Someone else wanted him to fall. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my private investigator contact. It was early, but Marcus owed me a favor from the time I saved him from an IRS audit. Keisha. His voice was groggy. It is 4 a.m. I have a job for you, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold. And it needs to be done fast. What is it? He asked, waking up. I need a DNA sample from Dante Sterling, I said, and I need you to find a nurse who worked at the University Health Center in 2008. I looked at the screen at the evidence of the stolen $500,000 and the hint of a medical secret that could shatter the Sterling empire. Dante wanted a male heir to unlock his millions. He was banking on biology to save him, but he had forgotten the first rule of accounting. Always check the source data. If this tip was true, then the baby in Jasmine's belly, the golden ticket to his $50 million, could not possibly be his. And if that baby was not his, then Dante Sterling was not just broke. He was extinct. I closed the laptop. The sun was starting to rise over Los Angeles, painting the smoggy sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. I stood up and walked to the window. I had lost my house. I had lost my husband. But I had found the weapon I needed. It was time to go to work. The invitation felt heavy in my hand like a physical brick of malice. Cream cardstock, gold leaf lettering, and a scent of expensive perfume that made me gag. It was a summons, not an invitation. The Sterling family cordially invites you to the gender reveal of the future heir. Below the printed text, Dante had scrawled a message in his jagged handwriting. Come see what a real woman looks like. He wanted me there. He wanted me to witness his victory lap. He wanted to rub my nose in his fertility and my failure. Most women would have burned the card. I filed it in my evidence folder. I drove my rental car up the familiar winding roads of View Park. The security guard at the gate hesitated when he saw me, but I flashed the invitation and he raised the bar. I parked down the street away from the valet stand, not wanting to hand my keys to anyone employed by my ex-husband. The walk to the house gave me time to steel my nerves. My former home had been transformed into a circus. Blue and pink balloons formed an archway over the front door. A red carpet ran up the driveway. Reporters from local black media outlets were setting up cameras on the lawn, jockeying for the best angle. This was not a family gathering. This was a press conference disguised as a party. Dante was not just celebrating a baby. He was broadcasting his eligibility for the $50 million trust fund. He needed the world to know the heir existed before the check cleared next month. I smoothed my dress. I had chosen a sleek white pantsuit, armored and professional. I was not here as the grieving ex-wife. I was here as the auditor. I needed to see the players on the board. I needed to see how they moved. I walked up the red carpet, ignoring the whispers. The guests were the elite of Los Angeles. Doctors, lawyers, influencers. People who had eaten at my table and drunk my wine for a decade. Now they looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They parted like the Red Sea, afraid that my bad luck might be contagious. I reached the entrance where the grand double doors stood open. Standing guard like a bouncer was Terrence, Dante's older brother. Terrence had always been the bitter one. The one who worked hard but never got the glory. He was shorter than Dante, stockier, with eyes that always seemed to be counting other people's money. He blocked my path, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, 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 Terrence sneered loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. If it is not the ghost of Christmas past, I did not think you had the nerve to show up, Keisha. I looked him in the eye. I was invited, Terrence. Besides, I have some paperwork Dante needs to sign for the asset division. I am just here to facilitate the transfer. Terrence laughed, a harsh barking sound. Asset division? You mean you are here to beg for scraps? You should have stayed in your motel room. This party is for people who contribute to the bloodline, not for dry branches like you. The insult was crude and predictable. Dry branch, barren, dead weight. He was attacking my womanhood because he could not attack my intelligence. Is that what you call it? I asked coolly. Contributing. I thought Dante was the one making the contribution. You seem very invested in his success, Terrence. Usually you hate it when Dante wins. Terrence's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something dark passed behind his eyes. I care about the legacy, he said stiffly. The Sterling name must continue. And since you could not do the job, we had to bring in fresh talent. He stepped aside, mocking a bow. Go on in. Watch and learn, Keisha. Maybe you can take notes on how to keep a man happy. I walked past him, my head high. The foyer was unrecognizable. My carefully curated art collection was gone, replaced by massive portraits of Dante and Jasmine. The air smelled of lilies and arrogance. I moved through the crowd, scanning the room. I spotted Becky near the bar, my sister-in-law, Terrence's wife. She was holding court with a group of women from the charity league, laughing loudly. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with malicious delight. She whispered something to her friends, and they all turned to look at me. Becky detached herself from the group and glided toward me, holding 2 glasses of red wine. Keisha, she exclaimed, her voice pitch-perfect with fake warmth. I am so surprised to see you. We thought you would be too devastated to come. You know, with the baby and everything. It must be so hard for you seeing Dante so happy. She stood too close, invading my personal space. I am fine, Becky, I said. I just came to drop off some documents. Oh, sure, documents, she said, nodding sympathetically. Just an excuse to see him one last time, right? It is sad, really, but do not worry. Jasmine is going to be a great mother. She has such a natural instinct, unlike some people who force it. She took a step closer, feigning a stumble. Her hand jerked forward. Oops, she cried out. The wine from her left glass splashed across the front of my white pantsuit. The dark red liquid soaked instantly into the fabric, spreading like a gunshot wound across my chest and stomach. The room went silent. The music seemed to stop. Everyone was looking at us. Becky covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes dancing with triumph. Oh my God, I am so clumsy, she said loud enough for the back row to hear. I am so sorry, Keisha. Look at you. You look like a mess. Maybe you should go. You cannot stay here looking like that. It is embarrassing. It was a power move, a public branding. She wanted me to run away in tears, humiliated and stained. She wanted to show everyone that I was the stained, rejected woman who did not belong in their pristine world. I looked down at the stain, then I looked at Becky. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out a handkerchief, and dabbed at the worst of it. It is just wine, Becky, I said, my voice calm, carrying through the silent room. It washes out, unlike the stain of what you and your husband are doing. Becky's smile vanished. What is that supposed to mean? I did not answer her. I turned my back on her, dismissing her completely. I walked further into the room, wearing the wine stain like a badge of war. I would not leave. I would not give them the satisfaction. I found a spot near the back of the room where I could see the stage. Dante was up there holding a microphone, looking like a king. He was wearing a white tuxedo that matched the decor. Beside him sat Jasmine on a velvet throne. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. Her skin glowed, her hair was perfect, and her hands rested protectively on her baby bump. The press cameras flashed blindingly. Dante was soaking it up. Welcome everyone, Dante boomed. Today is a historic day. Today we celebrate the future of the Sterling Empire. For too long this family has waited for a true heir, a son to carry on my father's name. The crowd cheered. Mama Joyce was in the front row wiping away tears of joy. I watched Dante. He looked at Jasmine with possession, not love. He looked at her belly like it was a vault containing $50 million. But then I saw it. The moment was fleeting, but my auditor's eyes caught it. Dante turned to the crowd, raising his arms to quiet the applause. Behind him, Jasmine looked up. She did not look at her future husband. She did not look at the crowd. Her eyes locked on someone standing in the shadows near the kitchen door. I followed her gaze. It was Terrence. He was not looking at Dante with his usual jealousy. He was looking at Jasmine. And the look on his face was raw, hungry, and terrified. It was a look of intimacy, a look of shared secrets. Jasmine offered him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Terrence let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing. Then he raised his glass to her, a private toast in the middle of a public spectacle. The air in the room seemed to shift. The math in my head started to rearrange itself. Terrence, the jealous brother, the one who hated Dante for being the favorite. The one who was married to Becky, the woman who was currently trying to destroy me to secure her place in the family. Why was Terrence so happy that Dante was getting the money? If Dante had a son, Dante got the 50 million. Terrence got nothing. Unless the son was not Dante's. If Dante's medical records were accurate, he could not have children. If the baby was real, it had to have a father. And if that father wanted to keep the money in the family while cutting Dante out of the biological loop, who better than the brother? It was a double cross, a long con. Terrence was planting his own seed in Dante's garden. I watched Becky again. She was watching Terrence, watching Jasmine. She did not look jealous. She looked anxious. She looked like a woman managing a very fragile explosive device. She knew. She was part of it. The wine on my chest felt cold, but my blood was boiling. They were playing a game so much darker than I had imagined. They were not just defrauding the trust. They were committing incestuous fraud on a Shakespearean level. Dante grabbed Jasmine's hand and pulled her to her feet. "And now the moment you have all been waiting for," he shouted. "Let us see the color of the sterling legacy." Confetti cannons blasted. Blue smoke filled the air. "It is a boy," the crowd roared. Dante hugged Jasmine, kissing her hard for the cameras. But over Dante's shoulder, Jasmine's eyes found Terence again, and she smiled. I backed away into the shadows. I had seen enough. I had the invitation. I had the wine stain. But more importantly, I had the theory. I slipped out the side door, avoiding the valet. I walked to my car in the dark, my mind racing. I needed that DNA test. And I needed it now. Because if my theory was right, I was not just going to divorce Dante. I was going to dismantle the entire Sterling family tree branch by rotten branch. I sat in my car and dialed Marcus. "Did you get the sample?" I asked. "I got it," Marcus said. "And I found the nurse. She is willing to talk." "Good," I said, starting the engine. "Meet me at the lab. I have a new hypothesis to test. And bring a second kit." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Because," I said, watching the blue smoke drift out of the mansion windows, "I think we need to test more than just Dante. We need to test the uncle, too." The party was just getting started, but the hangover was going to be lethal. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel mattress, scrubbing at the dried Cabernet stain on my white pantsuit with a hotel bar of soap. Becky's wine had left a mark that looked like a jagged scar across my chest, but the stain on my memory was far harder to remove. I closed my eyes, and the image of Dante on that stage, preening like a peacock over a child that could not possibly exist, burned behind my eyelids. I needed to stop reacting and start auditing. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the anonymous email from the nurse. University Health Center, 2008. Mumps orchitis. I knew that term. I knew it because I had seen it before. My mind traveled back 12 years to the second year of our marriage. We had just started trying for a baby. Dante had been eager, almost desperate to prove his virility. When months turned into a year with no positive test, he had become sullen. He refused to get tested, insisting that a Sterling man had no issues in that department. It had to be me. So I took the burden. I went to the fertility clinic alone. I took the invasive tests. I let them probe and prod me. And when the doctors found nothing wrong with me, I had begged Dante to come in just once. He had gone reluctantly. But he made me pick up the results. I remembered sitting in Dr. Evans' office, the sunlight hitting the dust motes in the air. Dr. Evans looked at me with deep sympathy. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a semen analysis. The count was 0. Azoospermia. Then he showed me the medical history Dante had filled out, but clearly never understood. The high fever in college, the swelling. He had mumps as an adult. It had sterilized him. I remembered driving home that day with the truth burning a hole in my purse. I looked at Dante, so proud, so fragile in his masculinity. If I told him he was sterile, it would destroy him. His father was a tyrant who valued strength above all else. If Dante knew he was broken, he would crumble. So I burned the report. I lied to my husband for a decade. I told him the doctors found issues with my lining. I told him we needed IVF. I secretly arranged for anonymous donor sperm that matched his phenotype, hoping he would never know. When those rounds failed, I let him blame my body. I let him call me barren. I let his mother look at me with disdain. I took every bullet to protect his ego because I loved him. And how did he repay me? He discarded me for a 24-year-old because he thought I was the broken one. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He did not know. He truly believed that baby was his. He believed his swimmers had finally found the finish line. But if he was sterile, then who was the father? I picked up my phone and called Marcus. It was mid-morning now. "I need you to get something for me," I said, my voice devoid of the trembling that had plagued me the night before. "Name it," Marcus said. "I need Dante's DNA, not a cup from a trash can. I need something undeniable." He works out at Equinox on Olive Street every morning at 10. He drinks from a reusable metal bottle, but he uses their towels. "Get me a towel. Get me a bottle. Get me anything with his saliva or sweat on it." "Done," Marcus said. What else? I need eyes on Jasmine, I said. She is living in my house now. I want to know where she goes when Dante is at the office. I want to know who she talks to. I wired Marcus a retainer that drained the last of my personal savings. It was a gamble, but forensic accounting is all about investment and return. 2 hours later, Marcus texted me a photo of a plastic biohazard bag containing a white gym towel. Got it. He wiped his face with it after a treadmill run, dropping it at the lab now. I called my contact at the lab, a woman named Sarah, who owed me her job after I found the embezzlement scheme her boss was running. Sarah, I need a rush on a YSTR analysis, I told her. Compare the sample Marcus is bringing against the prenatal profile you have on file for Jasmine Wells. Keisha, that is highly irregular, Sarah whispered. That prenatal test is sealed. I know I said. But if I am right, you are going to want to be on the winning side of this. Just run the numbers, Sarah. Tell me if the baby in Jasmine's belly shares a paternal line with Dante. She agreed reluctantly. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the motel room building my case file. I pulled tax returns. I pulled credit card statements. I reconstructed the timeline of the affair. Dante had started paying Jasmine's rent 6 months ago. He had leased a Porsche in her name 3 months ago. But there was a discrepancy. I found a series of cash withdrawals from Dante's personal account. $9,000 here, $5,000 there, just under the $10,000 reporting limit. He was smart enough to avoid federal flags, but stupid enough to leave a pattern. Where was the cash going? At 5 p.m. my phone pinged. It was Marcus. I am outside the house on View Park, he texted. Jasmine just left. She is driving the Porsche. Follow her, I typed back. 20 minutes later. She is pulling into a motel in Inglewood, the Sea Breeze. It is a dive Keisha, not exactly the Ritz. Why would the future Mrs. Dante Sterling, driving a brand new Porsche, go to a cheap motel in Inglewood? Keep watching, I ordered. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The suspense was making my skin itch. I paced the small room, then my phone buzzed. A photo message. Check this out, Marcus wrote. I opened the image. It was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens through a car window, but the subjects were unmistakable. Jasmine was standing in the doorway of room 12. She was not alone. A man was leaning against the doorframe, his hand resting intimately on her waist. He was kissing her neck, and she was laughing, her head thrown back in a way she never did with Dante. I zoomed in on the man's face. It was not a stranger. It was not some random lover from her past. It was Terrence, Dante's older brother, my brother-in-law. The man who had blocked me at the door, the man who had sneered at me and called me a dry branch, the man who shared almost identical DNA with Dante. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the bed. The room spun. The look they had shared at the party, the toast Terrence had made, the way Becky had watched them with terror in her eyes. It all made sense. Dante was sterile. He could not produce an heir to unlock the $50 million. But Terrence could. If Terrence impregnated Jasmine and they passed the baby off as Dante's, the DNA would be close enough to fool a basic paternity test. They were brothers. They shared the Sterling bloodline. The trust required a biological male heir. Terrence was planting a cuckoo in the nest. He was helping Dante secure the money, knowing that the child, the heir to the empire, was actually his. He would control the legacy through his blood. He would control Jasmine. And eventually he would control Dante. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was incestuous fraud of the highest order. I picked up the phone and stared at the picture of Jasmine and Terrence kissing in the golden light of the motel sunset. They thought they were so smart. They thought they had covered every angle, but they had forgotten one variable. They had forgotten about the wife who knew how to read the fine print. Sarah called me 10 minutes later. Keisha, she said, her voice breathless. I ran the preliminary comparison, the sample from the towel and the prenatal profile, and I asked. They are a match, Sarah said. A 99.9% match on the Y chromosome markers. It says they are from the same paternal lineage. Exactly, I whispered. Same lineage, but not the same father. Standard paternity tests look for lineage. They confirm the father is a sterling, but they do not distinguish between brothers unless you run a specific advanced panel. Run the advanced panel, Sarah. But I do not have a sample for the brother, she said, confused. I looked at the photo on my screen. Terrence was smoking a cigarette, flicking the ash onto the pavement. You will, I said. Marcus is on site. I hung up and texted Marcus. Do not leave. Wait until Terrence throws that cigarette butt away. I need it. I walked to the mirror in the motel room. The wine stain was still visible, a faint purple shadow on my chest. Dante had destroyed my life for a lie. He was celebrating a son that belonged to his brother. He was about to hand over his fortune to the man who was sleeping with his fiancée. I should have been devastated. I should have been heartbroken. Instead, I started to laugh. It was a low, dark sound that bounced off the cheap drywall. Congratulations, Dante, I whispered to the empty room. You finally got your family. And I was going to be the one to introduce them. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered across the cheap motel bedspread like shards of a broken mirror reflecting a family so twisted it made my stomach turn. I stared at the grainy photo of Terrence kissing Jasmine, and suddenly the last 12 years of family dinners clicked into a horrifying new focus. This was not just about lust, this was a coup. I thought back to every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday at the Sterling Mansion. Mama Joyce sat at the head of the table like a queen, always serving Dante first, always praising Dante's investments, always fawning over Dante's suits. Terrence sat at the other end, often ignored, usually criticized. Terrence, the older brother who worked a mid-level management job. Terrence, who drove a leased Lexus while Dante bought cash Porsches. Terrence, who had to beg Mama Joyce for a loan to fix his roof while Dante got $50,000 birthday checks. Mama Joyce had created this monster. She had pitted her sons against each other since the cradle, anointing Dante the Golden Prince and casting Terrence as the spare. She had bred a resentment in Terrence so deep and toxic, it had metastasized into this elaborate, incestuous scheme. He wanted what Dante had. He wanted the money, the power, and the respect. And since he could not earn it, he was going to steal it using his own biological material. But the most chilling realization was Becky. I paced the small room, my mind racing. Becky was Terrence's wife. She was a woman who prided herself on appearances. She was the head of the PTA. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She was the picture of suburban white perfection, desperately trying to fit into the black aristocratic world of View Park. Why would she tolerate her husband sleeping with a 24-year-old Instagram model? Why would she stand by and watch Jasmine carry her husband's child and pass it off as Dante's? Because Becky was tired of being the poor relation. I remembered a conversation from 3 months ago. We were at a charity gala, and Becky had had too much Chardonnay. She had gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and hissed about how unfair it was that Dante got everything just because he was the favorite. She had said Terrence deserves the throne, Keisha. He is the one who actually takes care of the family. Becky was not a victim. She was the architect. She knew that if Dante died without an heir, the trust would dissolve or go to charity. But if Dante had a son, the money would flow. And if that son was actually Terrence's, then Terrence and Becky would hold the puppet strings. They would control the mother, they would control the child, and eventually they would control the $50 million. She was willing to endure the humiliation of the affair because she viewed Jasmine not as a rival, but as a surrogate. A paid employee doing a job Becky could not do. It was Machiavellian, it was brilliant, and it was absolutely repulsive. My laptop pinged. It was the email I had been waiting for from Sarah at the lab. Subject amnio results / cross-reference. My hands trembled as I opened it. I had called in a marker for this. Jasmine was high risk because of previous complications she had mentioned on social media, so she had undergone an amniocentesis last week to check for genetic markers. The sample was on file at the lab where Sarah was a supervisor. It was illegal to access it. It was a breach of every privacy law in California. I did not care. I was not a lawyer, I was an auditor, and auditors looked at the raw data. I clicked the attachment. The screen filled with rows of genetic markers, alleles, chromosomes, the biological blueprint of the fetus growing inside the woman who had stolen my life. Sarah had run the comparison against the DNA sample from Dante's gym towel. I scrolled to the bottom of the report. The conclusion was highlighted in red. Paternity probability 0.00%. The exclusion is absolute. The donor of sample A, Dante Sterling, cannot be the biological father of the fetus. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. 0%. Dante was celebrating a child that had absolutely no connection to him. He was handing over his legacy, his name, and his fortune to a baby that was a stranger to his blood. But then I scrolled to the second page. Sarah had run the second comparison. The one against the cigarette butt Marcus had snatched from the motel parking lot. Sample B. Terrence Sterling. Paternity probability 99.99%. The donor of sample B is confirmed as the biological father. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. It was true. My hypothesis was not just paranoia. It was a fact written in the language of proteins and enzymes. Terrence had impregnated his brother's mistress. Becky was allowing it. Mama Joyce was too blinded by her obsession with a male heir to see the deception right under her nose. And Dante. My arrogant, foolish, cruel husband was the biggest mark in the city. He was strutting around that party right now, popping champagne, accepting congratulations for a virility he did not possess. He was so desperate to prove he was a man that he had let his brother cuckold him in the most fundamental way possible. I felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion. Dante had treated me like garbage because I could not give him a son. He had called me a bad investment. But he was the one who had bought a counterfeit asset. I saved the file. I backed it up to the cloud. I printed 2 copies on the portable printer I kept in my travel bag. This was it. This was the nuclear bomb. But I could not just drop it. Not yet. If I emailed this to Dante now, he might bury it. He might pay Terrence off. He might find a way to spin it. The Sterlings were experts at covering up their sins. Mama Joyce would rather die than let a scandal like this ruin her reputation at the church. No, this had to be public. It had to be undeniable. It had to happen in a way that left them no room to maneuver. I looked at the calendar. Dante's birthday was in 2 days. The day the trust fund matured, the day he was planning to sign the final papers to claim the $50 million. He was throwing a massive gala at the Beverly Wilshire, a black tie event. The press would be there. His investors would be there. The trustee of the estate would be there. It was the perfect stage. I picked up my phone and texted Marcus. "We have a match. Terrence is the father." Marcus replied instantly. "Damn, that is cold. What is the play?" I typed back, my fingers flying over the glass screen. "The play is total scorched earth. I need you to find out who the trustee is for the Sterling Legacy Trust. I need his name and I need to know if he is going to be at the birthday gala." Marcus replied a minute later. "His name is Arthur Vance. Old school guy, very by the book. And yes, he is on the guest list. He has to be there to certify the heir." Perfect. I stood up and walked to the closet where my few remaining clothes hung. I pushed aside the business suits and the sensible blouses. I needed armor, but not the kind I wore to a board meeting. I needed something that said I was not the victim. I needed something that said I was the executioner. I grabbed my purse. I had drained my savings for the investigator, but I had one credit card Dante did not know about. A card I had kept for emergencies. This was an emergency. I was going shopping. I was going to buy the most expensive, most dramatic dress in Los Angeles. And then I was going to crash a party. Dante wanted a gender reveal. He wanted a show. I looked at the DNA report on the screen one last time. The 0% match staring back at me like a loaded gun. I was going to give him a reveal he would never forget. I closed the laptop and walked out of the motel room into the humid night. The rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. The morning before Dante's 37th birthday, the sun beat down on the glass facade of my independent consulting office in downtown Los Angeles. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the financial forensic report for a separate client when the door opened without a knock. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The heavy scent of oud wood cologne and the click of expensive Italian loafers on the hardwood floor announced his arrival before he even spoke. Dante strode into my office like he owned the building. He was wearing a navy blue suit that fit him perfectly, likely purchased with the last dregs of our joint savings. But he was not alone. Trailing behind him, struggling to walk in heels that were clearly too high for a Tuesday morning, was Becky. She was wearing a beige power suit that looked stiff and uncomfortable, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. I swiveled my chair around and folded my hands on the desk. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Dante?" I asked, my voice dry. "The divorce papers are already with the court. Unless you are here to return the money you stole from my retirement fund, I do not see what we have to discuss." Dante laughed, a short, dismissive sound. He sat in the client chair without asking, while Becky hovered nervously by the door. "I am not here about the divorce, Keisha," he said, smoothing his tie. "I am here about business. As of this morning, your contract as the external financial consultant for Sterling Venture Capital is terminated." I raised an eyebrow. I had managed his company's books since its inception. I knew where every penny came from, and more importantly, I knew where every penny disappeared to. "You are firing me," I stated. "Dante, you know the audit season is next month. You do not have anyone else who understands the shell companies you set up in Delaware." "We have that covered," Dante said, smirking. "We are restructuring, moving the financial management in-house, family only. It is a matter of trust, Keisha. And obviously, I cannot trust a vindictive ex-wife with the keys to the kingdom." He gestured to Becky, who stepped forward trying to look authoritative. "Meet the new chief financial officer of Sterling Venture Capital," Dante announced. I stared at Becky. Becky, who had once asked me if a tax write-off meant the government paid you back in cash. Becky, whose previous work experience consisted of running the PTA bake sale and a failed Etsy shop selling handmade soap. "Becky," I asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. "You are making Becky your CFO." Becky lifted her chin, defensive immediately. "I have been taking online courses, Keisha, and Terrence has been teaching me the ropes. Besides, it is just numbers. It cannot be that hard if you are doing it." I looked from her to Dante. This was not just an insult, it was suicide. Dante was putting a woman with zero financial literacy in charge of a company that was currently hemorrhaging money and actively committing tax fraud. But then I realized why. Dante needed someone to sign the documents. He needed a scapegoat for the messy quarter he had just had, the quarter where he funneled cash to Jasmine and lost thousands on crypto. He could not sign them himself without risking jail time if the IRS looked too closely. But Becky was desperate to be important. She would sign anything he put in front of her just to feel like a Sterling. He was setting her up, and she was too blinded by the title to see the handcuffs waiting in the drawer. "Does Terrence know about this?" I asked. "It was Terrence's idea," Becky said smugly. "He wants to keep the money in the family. We do not need outsiders looking at our books anymore." I leaned back in my chair. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They had just handed me the final nail for their coffin. "Very well," I said. "I will forward all the current ledgers to Becky's email." "Good luck, Becky. You are going to need it, especially with the new tax compliance regulations. Make sure you review the Section 409 evaluations carefully before you sign off on the executive bonuses." Becky blinked clearly, having no idea what I was talking about. "Oh, I will," she said breezily. "Just send the files." Dante stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We are done here, Keisha. Clear your things out of the server by noon. After tomorrow, everything changes. The trust fund clears, I get my $50 million, and you will just be a footnote in my biography." He walked to the door, Becky following like a loyal puppy. Before they left, Dante turned back. "Do not try anything stupid," he warned. "You are out of the game." The door clicked shut. I sat in the silence of my office for a long moment. Out of the game. He thought the game was checkers. He had no idea we were playing chess, and he had just sacrificed his queen to protect a king that was already in checkmate. I turned to my computer. I did not clear my things out. Instead, I opened a secure portal. The IRS Whistleblower Office has a very specific website for reporting high-level tax evasion. I had visited it before for clients but never for myself. I uploaded the files I had saved the night before, the transfers to the offshore accounts, the purchase of the Lamborghini using company funds categorized as business travel, the jewelry written off as office supplies. But the pièce de résistance was the document I had seen earlier this morning on the shared server before they revoked my access. It was the Q3 financial statement, fraudulent from top to bottom, inflating assets to secure loans. And at the bottom, digitally signed and time-stamped at 9 a.m. this morning, was the signature of the new CFO, Rebecca Sterling. Becky had already signed it. She had signed a federal document certifying false numbers. She was not just a bad accountant, she was now a felon on paper. I attached the document to the report. I filled out the form detailing Dante's involvement, Terrence's complicity, and Becky's signature. I checked the box that asked if I had inside knowledge. I hit submit. The screen refreshed. Submission received. Case number generated. It was done. The IRS would take weeks, maybe months to build their case, but the clock had started. And when they came, they would not just come for the money. They would come for the people. My phone rang on the desk, startling me. I looked at the screen. It was Mama Joyce. I debated ignoring it, but I needed to hear the fear in her voice. I needed to know they were rattled. I swiped answer. "Hello, Joyce," I said. Keisha. Mama Joyce's voice was shrill and breathless. "I am calling to make something very clear. Tomorrow is Dante's birthday gala. It is the most important night of his life. The trustee, Mr. Vance, is coming to certify the heir." "I know, Joyce," I said calmly. "I do not want you there," she hissed. "I know you, Keisha. You are jealous. You are bitter. You are bad luck. You have been a dark cloud over my son for 12 years, and I will not let you rain on his parade. If you show your face at the Beverly Wilshire, I will have security throw you out on the street. Do you hear me?" I listened to her venom. She was terrified. She was so close to the money she could taste it. $50 million to secure her status, to pay off her debts, to prove to the world that the Sterlings were royalty. She thought I was the only obstacle. She had no idea that her son was sterile. She had no idea her other son was sleeping with the mother of her grandchild. She had no idea her daughter-in-law had just committed federal fraud. "I am not bad luck, Joyce," I said, my voice soft and dangerous. "I am just the auditor." "Don't you play word games with me," she snapped. "You are not invited. Stay away. You are the past. Jasmine and that baby boy are the future." I looked at the DNA test results sitting on my desk next to the laptop. 0% match for Dante, 99% match for Terrence. "You are right, Joyce," I said. "That baby is definitely the future of the Sterling family, just not in the way you think." "What does that mean?" she demanded. "It means you do not have to worry, Mom," I said, using the title she hated coming from me. "I know I am not on the guest list, but I promise you I will not cause a scene at the door." "Good," she huffed. "At least you have some dignity left." "Oh, I have plenty of dignity," I said. "And Joyce." "What?" "Do not worry about me coming empty-handed. I am bringing a gift." "I do not want your cheap gifts," she spat. "It is not cheap," I assured her. "It cost me 12 years of my life." I hung up the phone before she could respond. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Tomorrow was the 15th, Dante's birthday, the day the trust fund vested, the day he thought he won. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. The city looked peaceful from up here, but down below in the offices of the Sterling Empire, the rot was spreading. I had the financial evidence. I had the medical evidence. I had the DNA evidence. I was not just going to crash a party. I was going to host an execution. I picked up my purse and walked out of the office. I had one more stop to make before the gala. I needed a dress. And it had to be red. The color of blood. The color of ruin. The color of a woman who was done bleeding for other people. The Beverly Wilshire Ballroom was a sea of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, a playground for the elite who measured their worth in assets under management. I stood outside the double doors, smoothing the silk of my blood-red gown. It was a dress designed to stop traffic, to incite riots, and to announce a war. I checked my reflection in the brass handle. The woman staring back was not the weeping wife who had been discarded at the Onyx. She was the auditor, and she was here to balance the books. I pushed the doors open. The noise of the party washed over me, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and a live jazz band playing a tune that felt mockingly upbeat. The room was packed with the who is who of Black Los Angeles: tech moguls, real estate tycoons, and the social climbers who clung to them like barnacles. In the center of it all, bathed in the spotlight of 1,000 crystals, was Dante. He stood on a raised stage holding a champagne flute, looking like the king of the world. He had Jasmine on his arm. She was draped in white sequins, a virginal costume that clashed with the smugness of her smile. Her other hand rested theatrically on her stomach, the golden goose that was supposed to lay the $50 million egg. I stepped into the room. It started as a ripple. A few heads turned near the entrance, drawn by the flash of red in a room of conservative black ties and cream gowns. Then the whispers started. The ripple became a wave. Silence spread outward from where I stood, cutting through the chatter, until even the band faltered and stopped. Dante looked up, annoyed by the interruption. When he saw me, his smile froze. It did not drop, it just calcified into a mask of panic. Mama Joyce was in the front row. She turned around, her eyes widening in horror. She looked like she was about to scream. Becky, standing near the buffet, dropped her fork. I began to walk. I did not rush. I walked with the measured cadence of an executioner. The crowd parted for me. These were people who had ignored my calls, people who had unfollowed me on social media, people who had chosen the winner before the game was over. Now they stared at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I held my head high, my eyes locked on Dante. "Security!" Mama Joyce shrieked, jumping to her feet, her voice cracked, breaking the spell. "Get her out of here! She is not invited! Someone call the police!" Two large men in black suits started toward me, moving fast. Dante looked relieved. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket, regaining his composure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed into the microphone, trying to reclaim the room. "Please ignore the disturbance. Just a bitter ex-wife who cannot accept that the Sterling legacy is moving on." The guards were 10 feet away. I did not flinch. I did not look at them. I looked past them to an older man sitting at the VIP table right next to the stage. Arthur Vance, the trustee. He was watching me. He was a man of the law, a man who respected contracts and facts above emotion. He had known me for 12 years. He knew I was the one who filed Dante's taxes. He knew I was the one who kept the Sterling accounts compliant. I held up a single blue folder. "Mr. Vance." I called out, my voice clear and steady. "I am here to facilitate the certification of the heir." The guards grabbed my arms. "Get her out!" Dante shouted, his sweat starting to show under the stage lights. "Wait!" Arthur Vance stood up. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of the checkbook. "Let her go." The guards hesitated, looking from Dante to Arthur. "Mr. Vance." Dante stammered. "She is crazy. She is here to cause a scene. She is here with a file," Arthur said calmly. "And since I am about to sign over $50 million based on the existence of a biological heir, I think I would like to see what is in that folder. Let her speak." The guards released me. I brushed off my sleeves, pretending to remove lint. I nodded at Arthur, a professional acknowledgement between colleagues. Then I walked up the stairs to the stage. Dante backed away as I approached, pulling Jasmine with him. Jasmine looked terrified, her hand clutching her belly as if I might snatch it. "Get away from me," Dante hissed off mic. "You are ruined, Keisha. You have nothing." I stepped up to the podium. I placed the blue folder on the lectern next to Dante's speech notes. I leaned into the microphone. The feedback whined for a second, a sharp sound that made the audience wince. Hello, everyone, I said. My voice boomed through the ballroom. I know I am not on the guest list, but since we are all here to celebrate Dante's birthday and his good fortune, I thought I should bring a gift. I looked at Dante. He was trembling. He knew I knew about the money. He knew I knew about the fraud, but he still thought this was just about numbers. He had no idea I was about to hit him with biology. Dante has been telling you all about his legacy, I continued. He has been telling you about the son he has always wanted, the son who is going to carry on the Sterling name. I gestured to Jasmine. She is beautiful, isn't she? And that baby. A miracle. Truly. Dante's eyes narrowed. What are you doing, Keisha? I am just marveling at science, Dante, I said. Because you see, I found something interesting in the archives, a piece of history you seem to have forgotten. Or maybe you just hoped it would stay buried. I turned to the AV technician, who was standing in the wings looking confused. I held up a flash drive. Play it, I said. The technician looked at Dante. Don't you dare! Dante screamed, lunging for me. Arthur Vance slammed his hand on the table. Play it, he ordered. The technician scrambled to plug the drive into the console. Dante froze halfway to me, realizing that tackling me on stage in front of the trustee would be the end of him. He stood there, panting, his eyes wild. Behind me, the massive projection screen that had been cycling through photos of Dante descended. The room went dark. A document appeared on the screen. It was grainy, scanned from an old microfiche, but the letterhead was clear. University Health Center. Patient name, Dante Marcus Sterling. Date, November 12, 2008. The crowd murmured, squinting to read the medical jargon. For those of you who do not have a medical degree, I said, my voice cutting through the darkness. Let me read the diagnosis. Acute mumps orchitis. I paused, letting the words settle. And the prognosis, signed by Dr. Evans. The screen zoomed in on the handwritten notes at the bottom. Patient advised of significant testicular atrophy. Semen analysis confirms azoospermia. Condition is likely permanent. Patient is sterile. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Sterile. The word hung there, massive and undeniable. I turned to Dante. He was staring at the screen, his mouth open, his face the color of ash. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. You want a male heir, Dante? I asked softly into the microphone. You want a son to carry on your bloodline. I pointed at the screen. According to your own doctors, that is biologically impossible. You cannot have children, Dante. You never could. I looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of shocked faces. So if Dante is sterile, I asked, allowing the question to hang in the air like a guillotine blade, then who exactly is the father of the baby in Jasmine's stomach? Dante turned slowly to look at Jasmine. She was shaking her hands, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. It is a lie, Dante whispered, but his voice was amplified by the microphone I was still holding. It is a lie. She is lying. Is it, I asked, or is it the only truth you have heard in 12 years? I reached into the folder and pulled out the second document. I anticipated you might be skeptical, Dante. So I ran a test. A DNA test. I held the paper up. Would you like to see the results? The room erupted. People were standing up, straining to see. Reporters were flashing their cameras frantically. Mama Joyce had collapsed into her chair, fanning herself. This was the moment, the point of no return. I handed the paper to Arthur Vance, who was standing at the edge of the stage, his hand outstretched. He took it. He adjusted his glasses. He read the conclusion. Then he looked up at Dante. His expression was not angry, it was disappointed and final. Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice calm but devastating. We have a problem. Dante looked from the screen to me, to Jasmine. The arrogance was gone. The king was naked, and I was just getting started. That document is a forgery, Dante screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with desperation, sending feedback screeching through the speakers. It is a fake. She printed it at home to humiliate me. Look at her. She is jealous. She is crazy. She cannot stand that I moved on and found a woman who could actually give me what I needed. He turned to the crowd, his face slick with sweat, eyes darting from face to face, looking for anyone who would believe him. I am a man, he shouted, thumping his chest. I am a Sterling. Of course I can have children. Do not believe this bitter, barren woman. She is trying to steal my moment. She is trying to steal my legacy. I stood perfectly still on the stage watching him unravel. It was pathetic. He was fighting a war against science with nothing but his ego. I looked over at Arthur Vance. The trustee was not looking at Dante. He was looking at the screen still displaying the medical diagnosis of sterility. He was a man who dealt in facts, and the fact on the screen was damning. Mr. Vance. I said, my voice calm and amplified, cutting through Dante's hysterics. I anticipated he would say that. Denial is the first stage of grief after all. And Dante is grieving the loss of $50 million. Dante lunged toward me again, but this time he was stopped not by the guards, but by the sheer weight of the silence in the room. Everyone was waiting. They knew I had more. You say that medical record is old, Dante, I continued. You say it is fake. So let us look at something current. Let us look at something undeniable. I signaled the technician. The image on the screen changed. It was no longer the old medical record. It was a brand new document. The letterhead was from the most reputable genetic testing lab in California. The date was yesterday. Dante froze, staring up at the projection. This is a prenatal DNA test, I explained, walking around the podium so nothing stood between me and the audience. It compares the genetic markers of the fetus currently inside Jasmine Wells with a DNA sample I obtained from you, Dante. I pointed to the first column of numbers. As you can see, the alleles do not match, not at a single marker. The probability of paternity is 0%. The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. Zero, Dante, I said. That baby has absolutely no biological connection to you. You are not the father. You never were. You are just the bank account. Dante shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and unseeing. No, he whispered. No, she is pregnant. It is my son. I saw the ultrasound. You saw a picture, I corrected him. You saw what you wanted to see. But science does not care what you want. I turned to Jasmine. She was still sitting on her velvet throne, but she looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She was weeping silently, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. But here is the interesting part, I said, raising my voice slightly. Because when I saw the initial results, I was confused. The baby did show markers consistent with the Sterling family line. It had the Sterling nose, so to speak. Just not your nose, Dante. I signaled the technician one last time. The screen refreshed. A new column of numbers appeared next to the first one. Sample B. So I ran a second comparison, I said. I compared the baby's DNA against another member of the Sterling family. Someone who has always been close to you. Someone who has always wanted what you have. The name appeared on the screen in bold black letters. Father Terrence Sterling. Probability of paternity 99.99%. The room exploded. It was not a gasp this time. It was a roar. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up to get a better look. Phones were raised, recording every second of the catastrophe. Dante stared at the screen. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to make the words rearrange themselves. Then he slowly turned his head. He looked toward the back of the room where Terrence was standing near the kitchen doors. Terrence looked like a deer in headlights. His face was a mask of pure terror. He had been caught in the most public way possible. The glass of scotch he had been holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. You, Dante whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization so profound, it seemed to physically stagger him. You slept with her. Terrence took a step back, raising his hands. Dante, listen. It was for the family. We had to do it. You couldn't produce the heir. We needed the money. Dante roared. We needed the money. Suddenly there was a shriek from the side of the room. Becky, Terrence's wife, the woman who had poured wine on me less than an hour ago, erupted. She wasn't looking at Terrence. She was looking at Jasmine. "You stupid girl," Becky screamed, her face contorted with rage. "You promised you would be careful. You promised no one would find out." She lunged at Jasmine. Becky grabbed Jasmine by her sequined hair and yanked her off the throne. Jasmine screamed, clutching her belly. "You ruined everything!" Becky yelled, slapping Jasmine across the face. "We were supposed to get the money. We were supposed to be set for life. You incompetent little tramp." The crowd surged back, creating a circle around the violence. Waiters dropped their trays. Mama Joyce stood up from her front row seat. She looked from Dante to Terrence to the screen that still displayed the evidence of her son's betrayal. Her hand went to her chest. Her face turned a terrifying shade of gray. "My boys," she gasped. "My legacy." She collapsed. It was a theatrical fall, slow and graceful, but the thud when she hit the carpet was real enough. Mama Dante shouted, turning away from me. But he didn't go to his mother. He looked at Terrence. The brother who had always been jealous. The brother who had smiled at him at Thanksgiving while sleeping with his mistress. The brother who had planted his own child in Dante's life to steal his inheritance. A primal sound ripped from Dante's throat. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of an animal that had been trapped and wounded. He charged. Dante flew off the stage, clearing the stairs in a single leap. He lowered his shoulder and plowed into Terrence, sending them both crashing into the buffet table. Silver platters of shrimp and roast beef went flying. The ice sculpture of a baby angel shattered. Dante was on top of Terrence, punching him repeatedly in the face. "You traitor!" Dante screamed, each word punctuated by a fist connecting with flesh. "You slept with her! You stole my life!" Terrence fought back, bloody and desperate. "I did it for us," he yelled, spitting blood. "You are a mule, Dante. You are a mule. I gave you a son." Dante grabbed a silver serving fork from the table and raised it. Security guards swarmed them, pulling Dante off his brother. Dante kicked and thrashed, his tuxedo torn, his shirt stained with his brother's blood. I watched from the podium. I stood untouched above the chaos. The red dress flowed around me like a pool of blood. Arthur Vance stood next to me, shaking his head slowly. "Disgraceful," he muttered. "Absolutely disgraceful." The police sirens began to wail in the distance. I looked down at the brawl. Becky was sobbing on the floor, her Chanel suit ruined. Jasmine was curled in a ball, protecting the baby that had caused the end of an empire. Mama Joyce was being fanned by a terrified caterer. And Dante, the man who had thrown me away like trash, was being restrained by 3 guards screaming threats at his own blood. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "Happy birthday, Dante," I said softly. I picked up my blue folder and walked down the stairs. The sea of guests parted for me again, but this time there was no pity in their eyes. There was only fear. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the Sterling family to destroy itself in the wreckage of their own lies. The party was over, but I had one more envelope in my purse, and the night was still young. The brawl at the buffet table was ugly and desperate, the kind of violence that only happens when blood turns against blood. Security guards were finally dragging Dante off Terrence, but the damage was done. Terrence's face was a mask of red, and Dante's white tuxedo was ruined, torn at the shoulder and splattered with the cocktail sauce from the shrimp tower. The room was filled with the heavy panting of the 2 brothers and the shocked murmurs of the elite who had never seen a dynasty collapse in real time. But it was Becky who commanded the next act. She was not rushing to aid her husband. She was not trying to calm the situation. She was standing over the wreckage of the ice sculpture, her face contorted into a snarl that stripped away every layer of her suburban PTA mom persona. The veneer of the dutiful sister-in-law cracked and fell away, leaving something raw and greedy underneath. "You idiot!" she screamed, kicking Terrence in the leg while he lay gasping on the floor. "You absolute moron! I told you to be careful. I told you to stick to the plan." The room went quiet again. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Even Dante stopped struggling against the guards to look at her. The plan, Dante wheezed, spitting blood onto the carpet. Becky realized too late that she had spoken aloud. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the horrified faces of her social circle. She tried to pull the mask back up, tried to smooth her hair and soften her expression, but the adrenaline had betrayed her. "I just meant," she stammered, backing away. "I meant we wanted to help you, Dante. We wanted the family to be secure." "Help me?" Dante asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "You watched him sleep with my fiancé. You watched him plant his child in my house, and you call that help? Keisha, make it stop." It was Mama Joyce. She was still in her chair, clutching her chest, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked at me, not her sons. She looked at me like I was the only adult in the room, like I could wave a wand and put the genie back in the bottle. I ignored her. I looked at Becky. "You were not trying to help Dante. Were you, Becky?" I said, my voice amplified by the microphone I still held. "You were trying to cash out." I signaled the technician. The screen behind me flickered. The DNA results vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting of the last 48 hours. "Since Dante fired me yesterday and appointed you as the new CFO, I continued walking to the edge of the stage. I decided to take a look at your first executive actions." "You were very busy this morning, Becky." The spreadsheet showed a series of wire transfers. Massive ones. Becky turned pale. "At 9:15 this morning, shortly after you signed the fraudulent tax documents," I said, pointing to the screen, "you authorized a transfer of $2 million from the Sterling Venture operating account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands." I looked at the crowd. "Anyone want to guess who owns that shell company?" I clicked the remote. A document of incorporation appeared. The owner was not Dante. It was not even Terrence. It was Rebecca Sterling. The crowd gasped. Becky had not just been complicit in the paternity fraud. She had been actively looting the company while the brothers were distracted by the baby drama. She knew the house of cards was going to fall eventually, and she had decided to grab the silver on her way out the door. "You stole from me," Dante whispered. He looked from his brother to his sister-in-law. The betrayal was total. It was panoramic. Every person he had trusted, every person he had prioritized over me had a knife in his back. "I did it for us!" Becky shrieked, her voice cracking. "Terrence never gets anything. You get the cars. You get the glory. You get the trust fund. We have bills, Dante. We have a mortgage we cannot afford because we are trying to keep up with you." I took what we were owed. She turned to Terrence, who was wiping blood from his eye. "We were going to leave," she sobbed. "After the baby was born, after the trust cleared, we were going to take our cut and go, but you had to get sloppy. You had to get caught." Dante slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked small suddenly. The arrogant king who had thrown the divorce papers at me was gone. In his place was a man who realized he was completely alone in a room full of people. He looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were 22, and he was struggling with his law school exams. He looked at me like I was the answer. "Keisha," he said, his voice breaking. "You knew. You found the money. You can fix this, right? You can freeze the accounts. You can tell them it was a mistake." He took a step toward the stage, shaking off the guards who had loosened their grip. "Baby, please," he said, using the pet name he hadn't used in a year. "Help me. They robbed me. They lied to me. You are the only one who was real. I am sorry. I made a mistake. Just fix the numbers. You can fix anything." The audacity was breathtaking. After the humiliation, after the eviction, after the mistress, after the cruelty, he still thought he could snap his fingers and I would revert to being his fixer. He thought my competence was his property. I looked down at him from the height of the stage. I looked at the blood on his shirt. I looked at the fear in his eyes. And I felt absolutely nothing. The love I had nursed for 12 years, the loyalty that had kept me silent about his sterility, it was ash. "I am not your wife anymore, Dante," I said, my voice cool and detached. "And I am not your employee. I am a whistleblower." I pointed to the back of the room where men in windbreakers were quietly entering through the service doors. I did not freeze the accounts to save you, Dante. I froze them to preserve evidence. I sent that spreadsheet to the FBI and the IRS this morning, along with the tax returns Becky signed. Dante whipped his head around. He saw the agents. He saw the badges. You called the feds, he whispered. You sent me to prison. You sent yourself to prison, I corrected him. I just turned on the lights. Becky screamed as an agent approached her, handcuffs glinting under the chandelier light. Terrence tried to crawl under the table, but he was hauled up by his collar. Dante looked back at me one last time. His eyes were wet. Why Keisha, he asked. Why go this far? You won. You proved the baby isn't mine. You proved they stole. Why destroy the company too? Why destroy the name? Because you took my home, I said simply. You took my father's records. You took my dignity. And you thought you could replace me with a lie. I reached into my purse. My hand closed around the second envelope, the one that had been burning a hole in my bag all night, the one Marcus had handed me just before I walked in. And Dante, I said, my voice softening just enough to draw him in. You think you have lost everything. You think losing the baby and the company is the bottom. I pulled the envelope out. It was smaller than the others, plain white, but it held the heaviest secret of all. You are worried about the sterling legacy, I said, holding the envelope up to the light. You are worried about the bloodline. You evicted me because I couldn't give you a sterling heir. Dante stared at the envelope. A fresh wave of dread washed over his face. What is that? He asked, his voice barely audible. I smiled. And for the first time that night it was a sad smile. Because despite everything, the truth I was about to reveal was a tragedy that predated us both. You think you lost a son tonight, Dante, I said. I opened the flap of the envelope. But you are about to lose a father. I pulled out the document. It was a DNA test. But not for the baby. This is a comparison between your DNA and the DNA preserved from the autopsy of the late Marcus Sterling Sr., I said. Your father. The man whose name is on the trust fund. The man whose legacy you have been chasing your whole life. Mama Joyce let out a wail that sounded like an animal dying. She lunged from her chair, knocking over a table of champagne flutes. No, she screamed. Keisha, don't. Please, I will give you the house. I will give you anything. Do not say it. I looked at Mama Joyce, the woman who had called me a stray cat, the woman who had mocked my fertility. She was not protecting Dante. She was protecting her own 40-year-old lie. It is too late, Joyce, I said. I turned back to Dante. You wanted to know if you were a Sterling. You wanted to know if you were worthy of the name. I dropped the paper. It fluttered down from the stage landing at his feet amidst the broken glass and shrimp tails. Read it, Dante. Read it and tell me who you really are. Dante picked up the piece of paper from the floor, his hands shaking so violently the document rattled like a dry leaf in a gale. The ballroom was silent, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a natural disaster. Even the police officers who had been moving to handcuff Terrence paused, sensing that the true crime was not the assault, but the revelation unfolding on that stage. I watched Dante read the results. I watched his eyes scan the lines of data, the genetic markers that defined a human being. I watched the exact moment his reality fractured. He blinked once, then twice. He looked at the paper, then at the portrait of Marcus Sterling Sr. hanging in the foyer, then at his mother, who was now weeping openly into her hands. This is a mistake, Dante whispered. His voice was small, stripped of all its usual bluster. This says excluded. This says probability of paternity is 0. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for me to tell him it was another trick, another forensic accounting maneuver. Keisha, he said, this says Marcus Sterling is not my father. I nodded slowly. That is exactly what it says, Dante. No, he shouted, the denial ripping out of him. I am his son. I am the heir. I am the spitting image of him. Mom, tell her. Tell her she is lying. All eyes turned to Mama Joyce, the matriarch, the queen of the Sterling social circle, the woman who had terrorized me for 12 years because my pedigree was not good enough for her golden boy. She looked small now, withered by the weight of a 36-year-old secret. She did not speak. She just sobbed, her shoulders shaking. Mom, Dante pleaded, stepping off the stage and walking toward her. Mom, look at me. Tell them. Tell them I am a Sterling. Mama Joyce looked up. Her mascara was running black tracks down her face. She reached out a hand toward him, but she did not say what he wanted to hear. I did it for you, she choked out. I did it to give you a better life. Dante froze. What did you do? Your father, Mama Joyce stammered. Marcus. He was a hard man. He was cold. He was never home. He was always building the empire, always worried about the legacy. I was lonely, Dante. I was so lonely. And who was he? Dante asked, his voice trembling with a rage that was terrifying to witness. Who was he, Mom? He was the gardener, she whispered. The word hung in the air. The gardener. The crowd gasped collectively. The irony was suffocating. Dante Sterling, the man who had looked down on everyone, the man who had evicted me because I was not elite enough, the man who had obsessed over bloodlines and legacies, was the son of the help. His name was Matteo Mama. Joyce continued, the words spilling out like vomit. He was kind to me. He listened to me. It just happened. And when I got pregnant, I knew. I knew Marcus would kill me if he found out, so I lied. I let him believe you were his. And because I felt so guilty, because I knew you were the one living a lie, I tried to make it up to you. That is why I loved you best, Dante. That is why I gave you everything. She looked at Terence, who was still on the floor, nursing his bloody nose. Terence reminded me of Marcus, she said. He looks just like him. He acts just like him. Every time I looked at Terence, I saw my sin. I saw the husband I betrayed. But when I looked at you, Dante, I saw my secret. I saw the only thing that was truly mine. Dante stepped back from her as if she were radioactive. You lied to me, he said. My whole life. Every time you told me I was the prince. Every time you told me I was better than everyone else. You knew. You knew I was a fraud. I wanted you to have the world, she wailed. I watched them, the mother and the son, the architect and the masterpiece of deception. It was tragic in a way, but tragedy does not pay the bills. And tragedy does not fulfill the requirements of a trust fund. I looked over at Arthur Vance. The trustee had retrieved the DNA result from Dante's limp hand. He was reading it, his face a mask of professional stoicism. He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and opened the leather-bound ledger he had brought to the party. Arthur drew a single thick line through a page. Mr. Vance, Dante said, turning to the lawyer, desperation clawing at his throat. Mr. Vance, this does not change anything. I am still the son he raised. I am still the name on the birth certificate. Legal paternity is what matters, right? Arthur Vance looked up over his spectacles. He looked at Dante with a mixture of pity and finality. I am afraid not, Mr. Sterling, Arthur said. Or rather, Mr. Matteo. I drafted your father's trust myself 30 years ago. Marcus Sterling was a suspicious man. He was obsessed with his bloodline. Clause 1, Section A is very specific. Arthur cleared his throat and read aloud, his voice carrying to the back of the silent ballroom. The beneficiary must be the biological issue of Marcus Aurelius Sterling. In the event of any dispute regarding lineage, DNA verification is required. No adopted children, no stepchildren, and certainly no children born of extramarital affairs shall inherit the Sterling legacy corpus. Arthur closed the book with a thud that sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. You are not his biological issue, Dante, Arthur said. You are legally excluded from the trust. You do not get the $50 million. You do not get the house. You do not get the portfolio. In fact, since the house is held by the trust, and you are not the beneficiary, you are currently trespassing. Dante fell to his knees. It was a slow collapse, like a building whose foundations had been dynamited. He stared at the floor, his hands gripping the carpet. $50 million. Gone. The empire he thought was his birthright. Gone. The identity he had used to bludgeon me for a decade. Gone. And then the final twisting of the knife. Arthur turned his gaze to the floor where Terence was sitting handcuffed by the IRS agents, but listening intently. That leaves only one eligible heir, Arthur said. He looked at Terence. Terence, you are the biological son of Marcus Sterling. Despite your current legal troubles regarding the tax fraud which we will have to address, the trust fund is technically yours. It cannot be dissolved. It passes to the next biological male heir. Becky let out a scream of pure frustration. She had bet on the wrong horse. She had helped Terence steal from the company to help Dante, assuming Dante would get the big payout. If she had just waited, if she had not been so greedy, Terence would have inherited everything simply by breathing. Terence started to laugh. It was a manic, bloody sound. He looked at Dante. I won, he wheezed. I finally won. I am the Sterling. You are the bastard. Dante looked at his brother. The hatred in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollowness that was far scarier. He had nothing left to fight for. Mama Joyce crawled toward Dante, clutching at his pant leg. Dante, baby, please forgive me. We can fix this. Dante looked down at her. Get away from me, he whispered. You are not my mother. You are the woman who ruined my life. He kicked her hand away. I stood on the stage watching the tableau. The family that had thought they were gods was now just a pile of broken people rolling in the wreckage of their own sins. Dante looked up at me. He looked at the red dress. He looked at the folders on the podium. You knew, he said. You knew all of this. I did, I said. Why didn't you tell me, he asked, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood and the sweat. Why did you let me throw the party? Why did you let me stand up here and humiliate myself? Because Dante, I said, stepping down from the stage and walking toward him until I was standing right in front of him looking down. You evicted me. You threw my father's records in the mud. You told me I was worthless because I couldn't give you a legacy. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. I wanted you to feel what it is like to lose your home, your history, and your name all in one night. I wanted you to know what it feels like to be discarded. I straightened up and looked at the police officers who were waiting patiently for the show to end. Officers, I think you can take them now. The police moved in. They pulled Dante to his feet. He didn't resist. He just stared at me as they cuffed him. He looked like a ghost. Wait, Dante shouted as they dragged him away. Keisha, please, who am I? If I am not a Sterling, who am I? I watched him being hauled toward the exit past the guests, who were now taking photos of his downfall. You are nobody, Dante, I said softly. Just like you told me I was. I turned to Mama Joyce, who was still weeping on the floor. And Joyce, I said, you might want to call a cab. The trust owns this house now, and Arthur is very strict about trespassers. I walked past them, past the ruined buffet, past the sobbing mistress and the handcuffed sister-in-law. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. The Sterling legacy was dead, but my life was just beginning. And I had one more stop to make, the IRS office. Because while revenge is sweet, a multi-million-dollar whistleblower reward is sweeter. The silence that followed the DNA revelation was heavy and suffocating, but it was short-lived. The sound of sirens that had been a distant wail grew louder until it seemed to be coming from inside the walls of the Beverly Wilshire. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open, but this time it was not a dramatic entrance for a party guest. It was a raid. A dozen agents in navy blue windbreakers swarmed into the room. The letters FBI and IRS were emblazoned in yellow on their backs, moving with a terrifying precision that cut through the chaos of the ruined gala. The guests who had been busy recording the family drama on their phones suddenly scrambled back, dropping their devices and raising their hands instinctively. This was no longer a social scandal, it was a federal crime scene. I stood near the podium watching the dominoes fall exactly as I had arranged them. I had sent the encrypted files to the IRS whistleblower portal just 24 hours ago, But when you hand the government a roadmap to recover millions in stolen taxes, they move with remarkable speed. Dante was the first target. He was still on his knees staring at the DNA test that proved he was a fraud, but he snapped back to reality when two agents hauled him up by his armpits. Dante Sterling, one of the agents, barked, his voice cutting through the room. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny." Dante struggled, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. "Larceny," he shouted, spitting blood from his busted lip. "I am a venture capitalist. I own this town. You cannot touch me. I am a Sterling." The agent spun him around and slammed him against the edge of the stage. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed like a gunshot. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, indifferent to Dante's pedigree. Across the room, Terence tried to make a run for the service exit. He scrambled over the debris of the buffet table, slipping on shrimp cocktails and broken glass. He didn't make it 5 feet. An agent tackled him mid-stride, sending him crashing into a tower of champagne glasses. "Terence Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering," the agent said, dragging him up. "It was her," Terence screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Becky, who was frozen near the bar. "It was her idea. She cooked the books. I just did what she told me. She is the CFO. Look at the signatures." Becky let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She looked around, looking for an exit, looking for an ally, looking for anyone to blame. She locked eyes with me. "Keisha," she yelled. Tell them I did not know. You sent me the files. You set me up." I walked slowly down the stairs of the stage, my red dress trailing behind me like a royal train. I stopped a few feet from where an agent was approaching Becky. "I sent you the ledgers, Becky," I said, my voice calm. "I did not make you sign them. I warned you to read the compliance regulations. I warned you that the new tax laws were strict. But you were so desperate to be important. You were so desperate to have a title that you signed a federal document declaring false assets without even reading the first page." The agent took Becky's wrist. She tried to pull away, her nails clawing at the air. "No," she sobbed. "I have kids. I am a mother. You cannot take me. I am a Sterling." The agent cuffed her efficiently. "Ma'am, you can explain that to the judge." The ballroom was a scene of absolute devastation. The elite of Los Angeles were pressing themselves against the walls, terrified of being associated with the criminals in the center of the room. But there was one person who thought she could slip away unnoticed. Jasmine. She had risen from her velvet throne during the chaos. She had kicked off her heels and was moving quickly toward the side exit, clutching her purse, likely filled with the cash Dante had given her earlier that day. She looked like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, abandoning the man she claimed to love and the family she had tried to infiltrate. She almost made it. She reached the door, her hand on the handle. But she was blocked. A wall of women stood in her way. These were not just any guests. These were the wives of the board members, the matriarchs of the social circle, the women who valued loyalty and lineage above all else. They had watched Jasmine parade her affair in front of me. They had watched her mock my infertility. And now they watched her try to run. "Going somewhere, honey?" one of them asked a tall woman in emerald silk, who I recognized as the wife of Dante's biggest investor. Jasmine stammered, stepping back. "I have to go. My baby. The stress." "Your baby is fine," the woman said, crossing her arms. "But you are not going anywhere. You are a material witness, and honestly, you are a disgrace." Jasmine tried to push past them, but they did not move. They formed a circle around her, a barrier of judgment and diamonds. "You thought you could sleep your way to the top," another woman said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You thought you could steal a husband and a fortune and walk away smiling. Look around you, girl. The party is over." Jasmine collapsed to the floor, weeping not for her sins, but because she was trapped. She looked at Dante, hoping for a rescue, but Dante was being marched toward the main doors, his head hung low. I walked toward the exit, following the procession of prisoners. The guests parted for me, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and respect. They knew who had called the feds. They knew who had dropped the DNA bomb. They knew that Keisha Sterling was not a woman to be trifled with. As the agents pushed Dante through the doors, he saw me. He planted his feet, struggling against the guards to look at me one last time. His face was a ruin of tears and blood. "Keisha," he screamed, his voice raw. "Keisha, wait." I stopped. I stood in the doorway, the cool night air hitting my face, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painting the driveway in chaotic strokes. "Please," Dante begged. "Call the lawyer, call the firm, post my bail. I have money in the offshore accounts. I can pay you back. We can fix this. You are still my wife. You are the only one who can help me." He looked pathetic. The man who had told me I was a bad investment. The man who had evicted me in the rain. The man who had tried to replace me with a lie. He was begging me to save him, because he finally realized I was the only competent person he had ever known. I looked at him. I looked at the handcuffs digging into his wrists. I looked at the police cars waiting to take him to a cell where there were no silk sheets and no room service. I stepped closer, my red dress rustling softly. "I am sorry, Dante," I said, my voice loud enough for the reporters outside to hear. "I have a strict policy." Dante looked hopeful for a split second. "What is it, baby?" "Anything." I smiled a cold final smile. "I only bail out family," I said. Dante's face crumbled. "And according to the DNA test you just read," I continued, leaning in so he could see the truth in my eyes, "you are not a Sterling. You are nobody. You are just a bad investment," I finally wrote off. I turned to the agent holding him. "Take him away, officer. He does not belong here." Dante screamed my name as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. I did not look back. I watched the car pull away, the sirens wailing into the night, carrying the wreckage of my past to the booking station. I stood on the steps of the hotel alone, but not lonely. The night air smelled of rain and justice. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a notification from the IRS whistleblower portal. "Case status updated, investigation active." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, sharp air of freedom. The audit was complete. The accounts were balanced. And for the first time in 12 years, I was exactly where I needed to be. On the winning side of the ledger. The fall of the House of Sterling was not a quiet event. It was a slow, agonizing public demolition that the entire city watched with bated breath. I watched it too, but not from the front row. I watched it from the safety of my new life, observing the wreckage through the lens of court documents and news reports as the consequences of their greed finally came home to roost. The first domino to fall completely was Mama Joyce. For 30 years she had reigned over the social scene of View Park, clutching her pearls and her secrets with equal tightness. She believed her position as the matriarch of the Sterling legacy was unassailable. But Arthur Vance, the trustee, was a man who took his fiduciary duties as seriously as scripture. Since Dante was not the biological son of Marcus Sterling Sr., he had no claim to the estate. Since Terence was the biological son, but was currently indicted for federal fraud, the trust was placed into a conservatorship. The first order of business was asset recovery. I drove past the mansion 3 months after the arrest. There were no balloons or red carpets this time. There was a moving truck. Not a luxury relocation service, but a budget rental. Mama Joyce was standing on the sidewalk surrounded by a few cardboard boxes. She looked shrunken. The designer caftans were gone, replaced by a simple tracksuit that had seen better days. She was being evicted. The trust owned the house, and Arthur Vance had no intention of letting a woman who had defrauded his late client live in luxury on the estate's dime. He had given her 30 days to vacate. She had dragged her feet, hoping for a miracle that never came. I watched from my car as a group of women from her church walked by on the other side of the street. In the past, they would have stopped to gossip, to admire her garden. Now they turned their heads. They knew. Everyone knew. The DNA test I had dropped at the gala had not just exposed Dante's paternity, it had exposed Joyce's infidelity. She had passed off the gardener's son as the heir to the Sterling fortune for 36 years. In her world, that kind of deception was unforgivable. She was not just poor, now she was a pariah. She spotted my car. For a moment our eyes met. I expected her to scream, to curse me, to blame me for her downfall. But she just looked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She picked up a box and walked toward the bus stop. She was moving to a government-subsidized senior living facility in South Los Angeles. It was a roof over her head, but it was a long way from the hill. Dante's fate was less quiet and far more brutal. The federal trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence I had provided, the forensic audit, the tax returns Becky had signed, the wire transfers, was insurmountable. His lawyer tried to argue that he was a victim of his brother's manipulation, but the jury saw the lifestyle he had led. They saw the Lamborghini, the jewelry, the arrogance. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison. No parole for at least 8. I went to the sentencing. I needed to see it finished. Dante stood in his orange jumpsuit, his head shaved, his swagger gone. When the gavel banged, he flinched. But the real punishment began after the transport bus left the courthouse. Word travels fast in the prison system. Dante was not just a white-collar criminal. He was the guy who had thrown a gender reveal party for his brother's baby. He was the guy who had bragged about a legacy that wasn't his. I heard through a friend in the DA's office that Dante's life inside was a nightmare. He was the punchline of every joke in the cell block. They called him the cuckoo bird. He had lost his money, he had lost his name, and he had lost the respect of every man in the yard. The sterling name, which he had used as a shield for his entire life, was now a target on his back. He was a lone bankrupt and broken, living in a cage built by his own vanity. Then there was Jasmine, the woman who thought she could sleep her way into a dynasty. She gave birth 2 months after the arrests. It was a boy, just as the ultrasound had predicted, a sterling heir. But there was no trust fund waiting for him. Terrence's assets were frozen by the government to pay restitution for the fraud. The Sterling Trust was locked down in litigation. Jasmine tried to visit Terrence in jail, hoping to secure some kind of support. I heard she brought the baby, hoping to play on his fatherly instincts. Terrence refused to see her. From his cell, he sent a message through his lawyer denying the child and refusing to sign the birth certificate. He blamed Jasmine for his downfall. In his twisted mind, she was the temptress who had led him astray, not the partner in his crime. I saw Jasmine 6 months later. I was meeting a client for coffee at a diner in Inglewood, not far from the motel where she and Terrence had been photographed. She was wearing a stained apron, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking exhausted. She was waiting tables. In the corner booth, a baby carrier sat on the vinyl seat. The baby was sleeping, oblivious to the chaos of his conception. Jasmine looked 10 years older. The spark was gone. The arrogance was gone. She was just a tired single mother trying to make rent on a waitress's tips. She saw me when she brought the check to the table next to mine. She froze, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. She looked at my suit, my bag, my piece. I saw the question in her eyes. She wanted to ask for help. She wanted to ask for mercy. I left a $20 tip on the table and walked out. I did not hate her anymore. I did not feel anything for her. She was living the life she had tried to escape the hard way. She had gambled her youth and her body on a lie, and the house had won. Finally, there was Becky, my sister-in-law, the new CFO. Her downfall was perhaps the most complete because she had the most to lose socially. The federal charges against her were severe. Signing fraudulent tax documents is a felony. She took a plea deal to avoid a long prison sentence, agreeing to testify against Terrence and Dante. She got 2 years of house arrest and probation, but the collateral damage was total. Terrence filed for divorce from prison, citing her cooperation with the feds as betrayal. Because of her felony conviction and the instability of her situation, she lost custody of their children. Terrence's parents, who had always tolerated her but never loved her, petitioned the court for guardianship and won. They argued that a woman who would loot a company and frame her brother-in-law was not fit to raise sterling grandchildren. Becky was evicted from her home in View Park. She had no job, no husband, no children, and a criminal record that made her unemployable in any finance-adjacent field. The last I heard, she had moved back to Ohio to live with her parents in the small town she had spent her whole life trying to pretend she wasn't from. She was working as a cashier at a grocery store, the very fate she used to mock people for. The woman who had poured wine on me to mark me as lower class was now scanning coupons for a living. The Sterling family had been a monolith, a fortress of wealth and judgment that had loomed over me for 12 years. They had seemed untouchable, but they were rot from the inside out. All it took was one person to stop propping them up. I sat in my new office looking at the file marked Sterling closed. They were all gone, scattered to the winds of poverty, prison, and irrelevance. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to make me homeless. They had tried to steal my dignity. In the end, they had only succeeded in erasing themselves. I closed the file and put it in the shredder. The sound of the paper being sliced into confetti was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The past was dead, the debt was paid, and I had a meeting to get to. The extended stay motel on La Brea smelled of lemon cleaner and stale cigarette smoke, a sharp contrast to the lavender diffusers and fresh linens of the home I had just been evicted from. I sat at the small, wobbly desk pushing aside the complimentary coffee maker to make room for my laptop. Outside the window, sirens wailed, and the neon sign of a 24-hour liquor store buzzed with a rhythmic electrical hum. It was 3 in the morning. Most women in my position would be sleeping or crying or calling their mothers. I was doing none of those things. I was working. I opened my laptop and the screen cast a harsh blue glow over my face. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I only engaged in before a difficult audit. For 12 years, I had been Dante Sterling's wife, his partner, and his support system. But tonight, I was none of those things. Tonight, I was the senior forensic auditor who had brought down 3 Ponzi schemes and a corrupt city councilman. Dante thought he had stripped me of my power by taking my house and my husband's status. He forgot that I was the one who set up his passwords. I navigated to the login page for the Sterling Venture Capital secure server. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Dante was arrogant. He was the kind of man who believed he was too smart to be hacked and too important to follow basic security protocols. He had likely changed his social media passwords to lock me out of his public image, but the financial back-end, the boring stuff, the numbers he hated looking at, he would have left that alone. I typed in the admin username. Then I typed in the password. It was the date of our wedding, followed by the word forever. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I let out a short, humorless laugh. He was so lazy. He had discarded the marriage but kept the password because remembering a new string of numbers was too much effort for a man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life. I was in. I started with the joint accounts, the ones he thought I was too emotional to check. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 6 months. The numbers scrolled past, reflecting the life we had built. Mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries. And then I saw it. A transfer. It was not small. It was a hemorrhage. $500,000 wired out of our joint retirement fund. The nest egg I had contributed to with every bonus check, every overtime hour, every tax season hustle. It was gone. Transferred to an LLC I did not recognize called New Horizon Holdings. I opened a second window and ran a search on the LLC. It was registered in Nevada 3 months ago. The signatory was obscured, but the associated bank account led to a debit card purchase history that told a story more vivid than any confession. Exotic Motors Los Angeles, $280,000. Tiffany & Co. Beverly Hills, $85,000. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard knot in my chest. He had bought a supercar, probably that matte black Lamborghini he had been drooling over on Instagram. And the ring. The ring Jasmine was probably wearing right now while she slept in my bed. He had paid for his mistress's engagement ring with his wife's retirement money. But why steal from the retirement fund? Dante had access to the family operating accounts. He had a trust allowance. Why risk a federal crime by draining a joint 401k without spousal consent? Unless he had no other choice. I dug deeper. I switched from the joint accounts to his personal credit lines. This was where the forensic part kicked in. I looked for patterns. I looked for the holes where the money should be. The Sterling family name was synonymous with wealth, but the numbers on my screen were telling a different story. Dante was not rich. He was drowning. I found transfers to offshore accounts in Malta and Curaçao. Online casinos. High-stakes poker sites. The amounts were staggering. 50,000 lost on a Tuesday. 100,000 lost on a Friday. He was bleeding cash. Then I checked his investment portfolio, or what was left of it. He had leveraged everything on a series of high-risk crypto coins that had crashed 6 months ago. The timeline matched perfectly with when he started bringing Jasmine to business dinners. He was panicking. He was broke. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I was Peter. But debt alone did not explain the urgency of the divorce. He could have stayed married and tried to hide it. Why the rush? Why the public humiliation? I pulled up the digital copy of the Sterling Legacy Trust documents. I had scanned them years ago when I was organizing his files. I scrolled to the disbursement clauses. There it was. Clause 4, Section B. The primary beneficiary, Dante Marcus Sterling, shall receive the corpus of the trust totaling $50 million upon his 37th birthday, provided he has established a line of succession. This is defined as a biological male heir, born in wedlock, or a stable marriage of no less than 5 years with proof of viable pregnancy. I checked the date. Dante turned 37 in exactly 30 days. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a satisfying click. He was broke. He owed sharks and bookies money he did not have. He needed that $50 million to save his life and his reputation, but I had not given him a son. And after 12 years, our marriage was a dead end for the trust requirements, because he needed the heir to secure the payout immediately. Jasmine was not just a mistress. She was a transaction. She was an incubator for his $50 million check. He needed that baby boy born, or at least proven to exist before his birthday deadline. That was why he evicted me. That was why he needed the divorce signed tonight. He needed to marry Jasmine and legitimize that pregnancy before the trustee reviewed his file next month. He was not in love. He was in debt. I sat back in the cheap motel chair, the springs creaking under me. He had destroyed my life not out of passion, but out of accounting. He had calculated that discarding me was cheaper than missing out on his inheritance. I saved every document. I downloaded the bank statements, the gambling logs, the crypto losses, and the fraudulent transfer of my retirement funds. I created a folder named the Sterling Audit and encrypted it with a password he would never guess. Just as I was about to close the laptop, a notification chimed. A new email had arrived in my personal inbox. It was not from a client or a lawyer. The sender name was blank. The subject line was just one word: karma. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. It was 4 a.m. Who was emailing me now? I clicked open the message. The body of the email was short, but it stopped my heart. Ms. Sterling, I saw what happened at the Onyx tonight. I used to work at the University Health Center in 2008. Your husband was a patient of mine. He treats people like garbage, and he thinks his money can bury the truth. You should request his full medical file from his sophomore year. Look for the treatment records regarding mumps or catus. He is lying to everyone, including himself. There was no signature, just an attachment. A grainy scanned image of an old patient admission form with Dante's name and date of birth. Mumps or orchitis. I froze. I knew what mumps was, but orchitis. I quickly opened a new tab and typed the term into the search bar. Inflammation of the testicles caused by mumps infection. Possible complications. I hit enter. The search results loaded. Top result: infertility, sterility, azoospermia. I read the medical definition. In adult males, mumps or orchitis can lead to testicular atrophy and permanent sterility in significant percentage of cases. I looked back at the anonymous email. University Health Center, 2008. Dante would have been 20 years old. We met when he was 22. He had never mentioned this. He had watched me endure years of invasive fertility treatments. He had watched me take hormone injections that made me sick. He had watched me cry over negative pregnancy tests month after month. He had let his mother call me barren, and all this time he might have known. I felt a new kind of anger, hotter and sharper than the rage over the money. This was a violation of my body and my soul. He had let me believe I was the broken one. I looked at the date of the email. It had been sent 10 minutes ago. Someone else hated Dante Sterling. Someone else wanted him to fall. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my private investigator contact. It was early, but Marcus owed me a favor from the time I saved him from an IRS audit. Keisha. His voice was groggy. It is 4 a.m. I have a job for you, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold. And it needs to be done fast. What is it? He asked, waking up. I need a DNA sample from Dante Sterling, I said. And I need you to find a nurse who worked at the University Health Center in 2008. I looked at the screen at the evidence of the stolen $500,000 and the hint of a medical secret that could shatter the Sterling empire. Dante wanted a male heir to unlock his millions. He was banking on biology to save him. But he had forgotten the first rule of accounting. Always check the source data. If this tip was true, then the baby in Jasmine's belly, the golden ticket to his $50 million, could not possibly be his. And if that baby was not his, then Dante Sterling was not just broke. He was extinct. I closed the laptop. The sun was starting to rise over Los Angeles, painting the smoggy sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. I stood up and walked to the window. I had lost my house. I had lost my husband. But I had found the weapon I needed. It was time to go to work. Keisha's victory teaches us that when faced with ultimate betrayal, composure and intelligence are your strongest weapons. She didn't just get mad, she got even by revealing the undeniable truth. Her story proves that a legacy built on lies, greed, and arrogance is destined to crumble while integrity always survives. It reminds us to never underestimate our own worth, even when those closest to us try to discard us. Sometimes the best revenge isn't noise or violence, but simply letting the cold, hard facts do the talking. Always keep your receipts because the truth is the only currency that truly matters. Have you ever had to expose a lie to protect yourself? Tell your story in the comments below and subscribe for more satisfying tales of justice served.